It was meant to be a trip to strengthen family bonds, something we hadn't done together in a long time. My name is Robert Johnson, and along with my wife Julie, our children Jake and Sophie, we decided to take a road trip through the countryside during summer vacation. We opted to leave behind the distractions of the big city and explore less traveled roads. After several hours on the road, we decided to take a detour suggested by the GPS. A secondary road led us to a setting straight out of a rural postcard. Green hills stretched as far as the eye could see, picturesque farms dotted the landscape, and the fresh air of nature filled our lungs. That's when we spotted a sign indicating a village called Pinecrest. It seemed like the perfect place to spend the night. With the car's fuel running low and a cell phone signal disappearing as we moved away from civilization, we didn't have many options but to rely on local hospitality. The road took us through a dense forest, and finally, we emerged into a small clearing where Pinecrest stood quietly. It was a peaceful village, with its white-painted wooden houses and empty streets, as if time had stood still there. We parked the car in front of a modest inn, its sign creaking in the wind, indicating Pine Trees Inn. Upon entering, we were greeted by a heavy silence and a musty smell. The attendant, a gray-haired woman with inquisitive eyes, welcomed us with a forced smile. "Good evening, welcome to Pinecrest. How can I help you?" she asked, her tone revealing a caution that made us uneasy. We decided not to mention the strange feeling that was beginning to settle in our hearts that night. We opted to simply ask for rooms for the night, hoping that the inn would offer some comfort and tranquility after a long day of travel. While Julie and I discussed plans for dinner, Jake and Sophie explored the surroundings of the inn. Little did I know that that night would be just the beginning of a series of events that would change our lives forever. After a simple dinner at the inn, where the food tasted strangely bland, we decided to retire to our rooms. Julie and I were weary from the long journey, but something in the air of that village prevented us from fully relaxing. As I lay in bed, I could hear the wind howling outside and the sporadic creaks of the old inn structure. Julie slept beside me, but I could sense her restlessness too. The events of the day haunted us, especially the temporary disappearance of Jake and Sophie while they explored the inn's perimeter. I remained awake for hours, staring at the dark ceiling and listening to every small sound from outside. I don't know how much time passed, but eventually, I fell into a fitful sleep, disturbed by murky and unsettling dreams. I was abruptly awoken by knocks on our room door. The clock read 3 a.m. Julie woke startled beside me, and we both looked at the door with apprehension. "Robert? Julie?" It was Jake's voice, tense and urgent from the other side of the door. I opened the door immediately, and he rushed in followed by Sophie, whose face was pale and eyes wide open. "Dad, Mom, something terrible happened," Jake began, his voice trembling. Sophie disappeared. We were outside exploring, and then she was gone. We couldn't find her for hours, and then we found her. Julie's heart skipped a beat as she hugged Sophie, whose small body trembled with the shock of what had happened. Jake continued, explaining through sobs that they found Sophie on the outskirts of the village, brutally murdered. Her body was lying among the trees, and the horror of the scene was etched in their eyes. Despair engulfed us as we held our children close and tried to process the terrible reality. That peaceful village concealed a deep evil, and now we were in the midst of it. The local police were called, but their response was strangely indifferent, as if this were nothing new to them. As we waited for the authorities, we realized we were on our own in this. Pinecrest wasn't the refuge we had hoped for. Instead, it was a place where danger lurked in the shadows and truth was as hidden as our beloved Sophie's body. The night dragged on as we awaited the arrival of the local authorities. Their presence felt like a distant echo of responsibility, unable to calm the whirlwind of emotions consuming us. Sophie was with us in spirit, but her physical absence weighed heavily upon us. While Julie and Jake stayed close, seeking solace in each other, I found myself grappling with the helplessness threatening to engulf me. I was the father, the protector of my family, and yet I couldn't protect our own daughter. Finally, a police car pulled up to the inn. 2 officers disembarked, their expressions weary and disinterested. We recounted what we had discovered, but their questions seemed more of a formality than a genuine interest in solving the crime. "Mr. Johnson, we will investigate the case," the officer said monotonously, while the other scribbled notes in his pad. "Please stay here at the inn while we do our work." They left us then, at the mercy of our own thoughts and fears. Julie and Jake wept silently, huddled in a corner of the room with the family photograph hanging in the background, a painful reminder of what we had lost. I knew we couldn't rely on the local police. There was something eerily wrong in Pinecrest, something the authorities were willing to overlook. I decided we couldn't sit idly by, waiting for justice that might never come. "We're going to find whoever did this to Sophie," I declared with grim determination, locking eyes with Julie and Jake. "We're going to uncover the truth, no matter what." We decided to launch our own investigation. In that silent and menacing village, whispers of secrets and fears echoed through empty alleyways. Wherever we went, we felt suspicious glances and suppressed murmurs. It was as if everyone there knew something we didn't, something that could cost us more than we could imagine. As we dug for information, we began to unravel the truth behind Pinecrest's facade of tranquility. The village was controlled by a local gang, enforcing their rule through threats and violence. Residents lived in fear, trapped in a cycle of silence and obedience. It was clear Sophie hadn't been a victim of a random act of violence. She was just another on a long list of silenced victims under the dark shadow looming over Pinecrest. With each revelation, our sense of urgency grew. The gang was watching our every move, and danger drew closer with each step. But we were determined to confront the evil that had stolen our daughter from us, no matter the cost. The night was still young, and our journeys through the village had only just begun. But we were resolved to press forward, armed with courage and the determination to bring justice for Sophie, whatever it took. As we delved deeper into our investigation, Pinecrest's secrets began to unravel before us like pieces of a macabre puzzle. Each clue we found only strengthened our resolve to uncover the truth behind Sophie's death and expose those responsible. Our first lead came from an elderly village resident, Mr. Andrews, who lived in a modest house on the outskirts. He approached us discreetly while we were exploring the village center, his face marked by decades of fear and enforced silence. "You shouldn't be here," he murmured, glancing around nervously as if afraid of being overheard. "Pinecrest is not what it seems. There is something very wrong happening here." Intrigued, we followed Mr. Andrews to his home, where he shared with us stories of the local gang's years of dominance. He told us how they controlled every aspect of village life, from commerce to local politics, using intimidation and violence to maintain power. "That's how I lost my wife," he said, his eyes welling with sadness and impotent rage. "And now, your daughter." Mr. Andrews' words resonated in our hearts, strengthening our determination to fight for justice not only for Sophie but for all of Pinecrest's silenced victims. Our investigations led us to dark alleyways and secret meetings, where residents risked their lives to share information with us. We discovered that the gang had ties to powerful figures in the region, which partly explained the local authorities' reluctance to investigate deeply. Each step we took brought us closer to the core of the evil plaguing Pinecrest. Meanwhile, we were constantly watched and threatened, knowing that the slightest misstep could mean our own ruin. Julie, Jake, and I became a team united by pain and determination. Each glance we exchanged was a silent reminder of what we were willing to sacrifice to see justice served. One particularly dark night, we found crucial evidence hidden in an old, abandoned library on the village's outskirts. Ancient documents and records told a story of corruption and violence spanning decades. It was enough to connect the dots we needed to expose Pinecrest's true face. But as we neared the truth, the danger intensified. The gang began to show their true strength, sending violent warnings and veiled threats. Our careful steps became even more urgent, knowing that the final confrontation was fast approaching. Sleepless nights became our allies, and the day, our adversary. The day of reckoning finally arrived in Pinecrest. The sun rose slowly over the village as we prepared for the confrontation we had both dreaded and anticipated for so long. Each of us felt the weight of responsibility and the shadow of imminent danger hanging over our heads. With the incriminating documents in hand, we decided to publicly confront the gang leaders. We knew it would be dangerous, but we had no other choice if we wanted justice for Sophie and for the others who had been silenced. We gathered in the village center, where residents began to assemble, curious and apprehensive about what was about to unfold. The atmosphere was tense, like the air was charged with static electricity, ready to explode at any moment. People of Pinecrest, I began, my voice echoing through the tense silence. We have uncovered the truth behind the horrific events that have plagued our community. We can no longer ignore the evil that has deeply rooted its claws here. Julie stood beside me, holding my hand firmly, her determined gaze reflecting the strength she had found within herself since Sophie's loss. Jake stood with us, his teenage face now bearing the seriousness of an adult who had seen too much, too soon. We are not alone in this fight, Julie continued, her voice strong. The guilty can no longer hide in the shadows. Pinecrest is our home, and we will not allow fear and violence to dominate it. The villagers' reactions were a mix of shock, fear, and silent support. Some looked at us with gratitude, others with disguised hatred and fear of the consequences of our actions. But we were determined to move forward, no matter the price we had to pay. Then the gang leaders emerged from the shadows, their faces twisted with anger and desperation at seeing their secrets exposed. The tension reached its peak as we confronted those who had caused so much suffering and destruction. The confrontation was brief but intense. Words were exchanged, accusations hurled, and finally, the truth came to light. The gang tried to resist, using violence as their last desperate line of defense. But we were prepared, united in our determination to bring justice for Sophie and for all those who had been victims of their reign of terror. The local police, finally awakened to the gravity of the situation, arrived and arrested the gang leaders. The villagers, freed from the oppressive yoke, began to emerge from their homes, their faces revealing a mix of relief and disbelief. For us, the Johnsons, the end of that journey was a blend of triumph and loss. We had faced human evil in its most brutal form and emerged on the other side, forever marked by the pain and trauma. But we also emerged with a new strength, a family bond fortified by adversity and our unbreakable love for Sophie. As we left Pinecrest, leaving behind the ruins of our past, we knew our journey was not yet over. The scar of losing Sophie would never completely disappear, but we would carry her memory with us as we continued our lives, determined to find peace and justice wherever we were. And so ends our tale of terror, not of ghosts or supernatural monsters, but of the evil that resides in human hearts and the courage needed to face it.